prove you right, you expect Mr. Henderson to step up. Your case is simple. You say Ms. Nesbitt cheated on you with her neighbor during the window of conception, and he is Ziane's biological father.
Yes, Your Honor.
Well, he buy her diapers, that's about it. He doesn't do anything for my child. A 2-year-old son that he knows that's not his, than his own daughter.
Wow. Yes, Your Honor, because I feel that I shouldn't have to take care of another man's baby. I felt kind of hurt,
So there's a level of resentment there.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, Your Honor.
Through the doctor's appointments, birth?
Yes, Your Honor.
You were?
Yes, Your Honor.
And his name was on there. I told him not to put his name on there because I had doubts from the beginning, but he snuck anyways and signed his name on there.
You had asked him previously not to sign it. Do you remember having the conversation with Ms. Nesbitt that said, don't sign it just yet because it may not be yours?
Yes, Your Honor.
You remember that conversation?
Yes, Your Honor.
And you signed it anyway?
Yes, Your Honor.
Your Honor,
When the truth hides in a test tube, when justice waits on a single strand of DNA, one decision can change every life in the courtroom. This isn't just a story about infidelity or a one-night mistake. It's a story about truth itself, how it burns, heals, and rebuilds. Judge Lauren Lake stands before another pair of broken hearts, reminding us that in every DNA test, there's more at stake than biology. There's faith, regret, and the eternal search for justice. In the quiet echo of the courtroom, the weight of truth changes everything. Behind every accusation and every teardrop lies a story of choices, of wounds that time cannot close, and of hope that refuses to die. For Judge Lauren Lake, it isn't just another case. It's another chance to restore the fragile relationship between law and justice. What unfolds under her gavel isn't only about who fathered a child. It's about who accepts the truth when it arrives and who hides from it even when it stares them in the eye. Every DNA test in paternity court is a modern-day parable. People walk in believing that science will save them, that the lab report will silence doubt forever. Yet many leave whispering the same haunting line heard across the Divorce Course podcast and the Game-Changing Attorney podcast. We thought we wanted the truth until it arrived. Because people often regret taking the DNA test, not for what it shows, but for what it exposes. Every betrayal, every lie, every moment when love was chosen over honesty. When Miss Nesbitt and Mr. Henderson stepped into Lauren Lake's courtroom, the world outside faded. Their case, born from a one-night stand, a neighbor, and the chaos of doubt, wasn't unique. Yet it reflected the lives of countless couples standing on the edge of the unknown. Evidence became emotion, justice became heartbreak. It wasn't just about a child's paternity. It was about the concept of justice in jurisprudence itself. How do you measure fairness when love has already clouded judgment? Lauren Lake's voice, calm yet cutting, carried the gravity of centuries of legal philosophy. She understood that the courtroom isn't just a legal stage in a divorce case. It's the theater where the soul confesses. Each time a DNA test envelope was opened, history seemed to repeat. One heart would break, another would heal, and somewhere truth would find its reluctant home. For Judge Lauren Lake, truth changes. Everything wasn't just a catchphrase. It was her courtroom's heartbeat. Outside the courtroom, podcasts and commentaries, like Celebrate Recovery Testimonies and the Divorce Course podcast, echoed the same theme. Justice begins where denial ends. Legal experts discussed adverse inference in the Evidence Act, explaining how silence itself can be treated as guilt when the facts beg to be spoken. Yet in Lauren Lake's chamber, it wasn't statutes that decided the outcome. It was conscience. She believed in a living law, one that breathes compassion into cold procedure. She believed that a relationship between law and justice must be nurtured, not forced. The DNA test was more than a scientific verdict. It was a mirror. And when people looked into that mirror, many regretted asking the question at all. Families were torn apart not by the results, but by what they revealed about trust. Husbands discovered that fatherhood isn't always written in blood. Wives realized that loyalty can't be proven in a lab. The audience watched, not as spectators of scandal, but as witnesses to the raw anatomy of truth. Miss Nesbitt's trembling voice, her accusations and defenses, became symbols of every broken promise. Mr. Henderson's confusion reflected the pain of men who believed love could override logic. But when Judge Lauren Lake lifted that white envelope, even time seemed to pause. DNA test results. That phrase alone carried enough power to rewrite destinies. For some it was liberation. For others, it was the beginning of lifelong regret. The case soon became the subject of discussions on the Game Changing Attorney podcast, where legal minds debated how personal accountability intersects with law. The hosts spoke about how evidence, whether in a divorce case or a paternity dispute, doesn't only settle facts, it reveals character. They drew parallels to Supreme Court precedents where moral duty outweighed procedural perfection. They reminded listeners that justice isn't a formula, it's a flame. Judge Lauren Lake's courtroom thus became a sanctuary for the misunderstood. It was not just a court of law, it was a court of restoration. Much like the healing shared in Celebrate Recovery testimonies, her rulings carried both empathy and authority. She didn't only ask who was right, she asked who was ready to change, and that made all the difference. In this double episode, the DNA test's revelation felt like a sacred ritual. When the results declared Mr. Henderson as the biological father, shock turned to silence, and silence turned to reflection. The truth had spoken, but truth, as Judge Lauren Lake often reminded everyone, does not heal by itself. It demands responsibility. It asks the guilty to repent and the hurt to forgive. Only then does truth change everything. Many who watched the episode compared it to modern adoption stories' full episodes, not because a child was adopted, but because emotional parenthood triumphed over biological uncertainty. The moment Mr. Henderson accepted the child, despite his doubts, was more than a legal recognition. It was the rediscovery of manhood. It reminded viewers that paternity is not claimed through DNA alone, but through presence, patience, and protection. Behind every ruling in Lauren Lake's courtroom lies an invisible layer of human philosophy, a living textbook on the concept of justice in jurisprudence. Scholars from law schools to Supreme Court forums have cited her approach as a bridge between empathy and enforcement. They discuss her ability to balance the cold steel of law with the warmth of understanding, proving that the relationship between law and justice is never static. It's a dialogue between mind and heart. The episode also exposed a pattern familiar to divorce lawyers everywhere. Adverse inference in the Evidence Act playing out in real life. When a parent refuses a DNA test or hides the truth, the law assumes the worst. Silence becomes a verdict. Lauren Lake, aware of that principle, uses it not to punish, but to provoke honesty. She invites each participant to confront their own evidence before demanding it from others. Because in her court, the truth is not a weapon, it's a mirror. Listeners of the Divorce Course podcast found themselves echoing her lessons, that justice in family cases isn't about winning, it's about healing. Lawyers cited the case in episodes about child support reform, exploring how emotional immaturity often translates into legal irresponsibility. One guest, a former attorney turned therapist, called Lauren Lake's approach restorative jurisprudence, a living example of law guided by compassion rather than control. Even the Game Changing Attorney podcast later revisited this episode. In a special titled When Evidence Meets Emotion, they analyzed how Judge Lauren Lake's courtroom blended storytelling with statute, showing that human truth is rarely black and white. They argued that her approach could reshape family law by integrating psychological insight with procedural discipline. The case became a reference point, not just for television justice, but for the evolving understanding of legal empathy itself. Through all this, one lesson echoed louder than any gavel. Truth changes everything. Those who sought to manipulate evidence, who thought a lie could shield them, eventually faced their own reflection. And while some wept in regret, those who said, "People regret taking the DNA test," others discovered liberation. Because truth, once spoken, frees even the guilty from the chains of deception. As Judge Lauren Lake often said, justice without empathy is tyranny. and empathy without accountability is chaos. In her courtroom, both coexist. Each verdict reminds us that the law, though written in ink, lives in the heart. The DNA test may settle the science, but forgiveness settles the soul. This case, did a one-night stand with her neighbor change everything, became more than a viral episode. It evolved into a cultural mirror, reflecting every broken relationship patched by denial, and every courtroom where truth waited patiently behind sealed envelopes. It was replayed on legal forums, dissected by analysts, and celebrated by those seeking recovery testimonies. It was quoted in discussions on adverse inference and cited in essays about justice in jurisprudence. Because in the end, this wasn't just a verdict, it was a revelation that the law may declare paternity, but only love confirms it. When the courtroom doors closed that day, silence lingered like smoke after a storm. The DNA test had spoken, and its voice was final. Mr. Henderson was the father. Yet the quiet that followed wasn't relief. It was reflection. For Judge Lauren Lake, this was the moment that mattered most. Not the cheers, not the gasps, not even the confession, but the stillness after truth arrives. Because that stillness is where change begins. For years, millions have tuned into paternity court not for drama, but for discovery. They come to witness what happens when the soul meets science. They watch people regret taking a DNA test, not because the test is wrong, but because truth demands payment. In that moment, truth changes everything. It destroys illusions, rewrites relationships, and exposes what law textbooks can never explain. The fragile humanity behind every statute. Judge Lauren Lake understands that the courtroom isn't merely a stage for conflict. It's a reflection of our collective conscience. Each stage in a divorce case or paternity hearing reveals something deeper about us. Our need for validation, our fear of rejection, and our desperate pursuit of belonging. The evidence may lie in paperwork, but the pain always lies in the eyes. As commentators later discussed in the Divorce Course podcast, the line between law and justice often blurs when the heart becomes evidence. They noted how Lauren Lake's court balances both, how she weaves empathy into enforcement, transforming her bench into something closer to a confessional than a courtroom. The podcast's hosts called it the relationship between law and justice made human, and perhaps that's what sets her apart. In her hands, the DNA test isn't just scientific evidence, it's divine irony. She reminds everyone watching that biology can confirm paternity, but it can't create fatherhood. Responsibility begins not when the test says yes, but when the heart says, I will. As the episode spread across platforms, it became more than a case. It became a classroom. The Game-Changing Attorney podcast dedicated an entire discussion to it, drawing parallels between courtroom integrity and corporate ethics. The host explained that what Judge Lauren Lake practices is more than law. It's leadership. She demonstrates that accountability, whether in a courtroom or a company, is the cornerstone of justice. They discuss the concept of justice in jurisprudence, how justice isn't a destination, but a discipline. It evolves with each generation, shaped by compassion as much as by code. They mentioned how the Supreme Court has echoed similar sentiments in landmark family law rulings, stressing that fairness must consider not just the evidence presented, but the humanity of those it affects. This is the unseen heart of every family law battle. Justice with empathy. Lauren Lake doesn't just arbitrate facts. She interprets human frailty. Her courtroom becomes a mirror where every participant, accuser, accused, and even the audience confronts their own reflection. And as she delivers her verdict, her voice carries not judgment, but wisdom. Truth changes everything, but only if you're willing to face it. Outside the show, stories like Miss Nesbitt's and Mr. Henderson's inspire conversations in communities everywhere. Celebrate Recovery testimonies feature men and women who face similar truths, those who cheated, lied, or doubted, only to realize that grace begins where denial ends. They speak of moments when a DNA test didn't destroy them, it rebuilt them, because sometimes the truth doesn't break you apart, it sets the foundation for something real. In one such testimony, a father described watching paternity court during his own custody battle. He said Judge Lauren Lake's words helped him stop running from responsibility and start embracing it. The truth hurt, he said, but the lie was killing me. For him, as for so many others, truth changes everything became not a warning, but a prayer. Legal scholars too began referencing these cases. Law students studied Lauren Lake's approach alongside discussions of adverse inference in the Evidence Act. They debated how emotional silence, when someone refuses to speak or hides evidence, can serve as its own confession. They examined how Lauren Lake's courtroom demonstrates that truth, even when uncomfortable, always demands a voice. Her rulings often echo philosophical principles once confined to legal theory. That justice in jurisprudence isn't blind, it's brave. It dares to look at what others turn away from. It dares to say, this is not just law, this is life. The emotional resonance of this case spilled far beyond television. Episodes of the Divorce Course podcast replayed its lessons through the lens of modern relationships. Hosts dissected not the scandal, but the psychology, the fragile balance between guilt and growth. They argued that cheating stories like Miss Nesbitt's are rarely about lust alone. They're about loneliness, power, and the search for validation in the wrong places. They connected this to broader themes explored in Adoption Stories' full episodes, where love, legality, and belonging intertwine. They noted how both paternity disputes and adoption processes confront the same existential question. What makes a family? Blood or choice? Through that lens, Judge Lauren Lake's work became more profound. She wasn't just revealing DNA results, she was redefining the meaning of connection. The Supreme Court may interpret the Constitution, but Lauren Lake interprets the human condition. Her verdicts echo not through legal journals, but through living rooms, classrooms, and therapy offices. The case also reignited discussions about child support and parental accountability. Legal analysts pointed out that financial responsibility must always follow emotional truth. Once paternity is confirmed, so is duty. Yet Judge Lauren Lake's message transcends economics. She reminds fathers that support means more than money. It means mentorship, time, and love. It means being present, even when the past is painful. Her words echo the principles debated in the Game-Changing Attorney podcast. Leadership begins where excuses end. Whether in business or family, integrity demands consistency. If truth demands sacrifice, so be it, because the cost of living a lie is always greater. In this context, the concept of justice in jurisprudence gains new meaning. Traditionally, justice is portrayed as a scale, balancing facts on one side and fairness on the other. But Lauren Lake transforms that metaphor into something more dynamic. For her, justice isn't balance, it's restoration. It's the process of rebuilding broken people into whole ones. She often reminds viewers that law without compassion is incomplete. A legal system may determine who a father is, but only empathy can help him become one. That is why her courtroom has become more than entertainment. It's become a ministry of truth. Listeners of Celebrate Recovery testimonies found parallels in her episodes. They shared how acknowledging wrongdoing, just as participants on the show must, became the first step toward healing. They realized that the courtroom, much like the recovery circle, is a sacred space where confession meets consequence. Both demand honesty, both offer redemption. For the audience, each new episode becomes a mirror. Some see their own stories reflected. Hidden affairs, broken trust, fractured families. Others see hope, a reminder that it's never too late to tell the truth. In every verdict, Lauren Lake plants the same seed. Truth changes everything, but only if you nurture it. Legal theorists have compared her courtroom to restorative justice models used around the world, systems that prioritize healing over punishment. They've cited how adverse inference in evidence law can sometimes fail to capture emotional truth, and how Lauren Lake's human-centered approach fills that gap. She brings jurisprudence out of the textbook and into the heart. Her philosophy aligns with the broader evolution of family law, reflected in Supreme Court, commentaries, recognizing that justice in matters of love and lineage cannot be robotic. It must breathe, it must feel, it must forgive. By the time the credits rolled on, did a one-night stand with her neighbor change everything? The internet was divided. Some condemned Miss Nesbitt's actions, others empathized with her vulnerability, but all agreed on one thing. Judge Lauren Lake's courtroom wasn't just a show, it was a sermon. The phrase "truth changes everything" trended for days across social media. Viewers shared clips, quotes, and reflections, turning a television episode into a nationwide dialogue about accountability. Law students debated the implications of adverse inference. Pastors quoted Lauren Lake's wisdom during Sunday sermons. Therapists cited her verdicts as examples of radical honesty in practice. Meanwhile, podcasts across genres, from the divorce course to Celebrate Recovery, echoed the same theme. Justice begins when we stop defending our lies. And perhaps that's the essence of why paternity court continues to resonate. It's not about DNA. It's about destiny. It's not about cheating stories. It's about redemption. It's not about shame. It's about surrender. Because as every lawyer, parent, and believer knows, when truth walks into the room, denial has to leave. The truth has been spoken. The results are final. Yet as Judge Lauren Lake lowers her gavel, what lingers isn't noise. It's the weight of revelation. The audience exhales. The participants wipe their eyes. And somewhere in the quiet corners of that courtroom, healing begins. Because when truth changes everything, it doesn't just close one story. It opens a new one. The case of Miss Nesbitt and Mr. Henderson will forever be remembered not for its scandal, but for its message. That truth, no matter how painful, is the only path to freedom. In a world drowning in excuses, paternity court stands as a sanctuary for honesty. It reminds us that the law may judge what we've done, but only truth can show us who we are. Lauren Lake's courtroom has become more than a legal forum. It's a space of transformation. The same lessons that echo through the Divorce Course podcast and Celebrate Recovery testimonies resound here. Real change begins with confession. Whether in a courtroom, a counseling room, or a quiet prayer, redemption starts when denial ends. When people look back on this double episode, they'll remember more than DNA results. They'll remember the way Judge Lake spoke about responsibility, not as punishment, but as privilege. She reminded Mr. Henderson that being a father isn't proven by blood alone, it's proven by presence. She reminded Miss Nesbitt that honesty is the highest form of love. And she reminded everyone watching that the relationship between law and justice isn't just a legal matter, it's a human one. In the weeks that followed, legal experts analyzed the case on the Game-Changing Attorney podcast. They compared Lauren Lake's handling of emotional evidence to the adverse inference in the Evidence Act, how silence, hesitation, or evasion can signal guilt as strongly as words. But what fascinated them most wasn't her adherence to law. It was her embodiment of it. She treated every case like a moral classroom, where law, psychology, and empathy meet on equal ground. The hosts called it living jurisprudence, a phrase borrowed from philosophy, but reborn through her courtroom. They discussed how the concept of justice in jurisprudence is no longer confined to written code or rigid rules, but alive in every human decision that balances mercy and accountability. Judge Lauren Lake became an example of what they termed compassionate enforcement. Justice that disciplines without dehumanizing. As this philosophy spread, her courtroom became a symbol of modern justice reform. Law professors began referencing her approach in discussions about family law, child support, and emotional recovery. They noted how her style mirrored restorative justice models embraced by the Supreme Court in recent interpretations, systems that favor reconciliation over retribution. It wasn't about softening the law, it was about strengthening its soul. Because the truth is, evidence can prove a fact, but only compassion can restore a family. Lauren Lake embodies that belief every time she steps onto her courtroom floor. Her questions dig deeper than timelines and text messages. They reach the heart of motive, morality, and meaning. She teaches that the courtroom is not just a stage in a divorce case, but a reflection of the human condition. In that sense, every DNA test becomes a spiritual trial, every tear becomes testimony, and every revelation becomes redemption. Viewers of Celebrate Recovery testimonies often say that her courtroom feels like an altar, a place where people finally face the truth they've avoided. They draw parallels between her judgments and their own journeys of healing. Both are painful, both demand humility, and both lead to liberation. The audience cries not because of the scandal, but because they see themselves in it, their lies, their regrets, their second chances. And that's the secret behind her enduring impact. Judge Lauren Lake doesn't expose truth to humiliate. She reveals it to heal. She understands that people regret taking the DNA test only when they expect it to erase guilt. But when they take it to uncover peace, regret dissolves into grace. It's the same principle heard in the Divorce Course podcast, where experts discuss how legal truth can lead to emotional recovery. They explore how admitting infidelity, fraud, or deception in court often becomes the first step towards self-forgiveness. One guest, a family therapist, summed it up perfectly. The courtroom is not where relationships end. It's where illusions end. From cheating stories to adoption stories' full episodes, Lauren Lake's cases touch on every corner of human experience. They remind us that family isn't defined by perfection. It's defined by persistence. The man who once denied a child may one day become her protector. The woman who once hid a secret may learn to live transparently. In this way, the courtroom becomes a place of rebirth. Each time Judge Lake reads those words, these results were prepared by DNA diagnostics. She's not just opening an envelope, she's opening a door to honesty, to accountability, and sometimes to reconciliation. Because truth changes, everything isn't just a statement. It's a cycle. It breaks, it burns, it builds. Even the Supreme Court has often reflected similar ideals in its writings, acknowledging that justice must be both fair and forgiving. The law must not only protect rights, but also restore dignity. Judge Lauren Lake's courtroom serves as a living example of that principle, merging emotional intelligence